Morning, everybody. Okie dokie. For those of you, from here it's a bit difficult to see, but from those of you who are having a conversation with me on the bus, you can go do something else now, because I'll basically just repeat what I already told you. The theme that I will try to weave a bit in my presentation is that of removing friction. Now, I'm very glad that you will have a lot of friction between you and your communications because the Wi-Fi is not working very well. That's great for me because it will be so much easier to get your attention. I will only use 50% of my capacities this morning. Thanks, David. Where are you now?
I'm up here now.
I thought, is he already gone away now? So thanks for the organizer. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Thanks for making me compete with a rainforest. I've never done that before, so I wonder how many people will be here in 30 minutes. Slides will be online. They're not there yet because it was very late this morning when I stopped working on them. But they will be a bit later once we get a connection. David already mentioned last introductory slide. This is my university, the University of Leuven. It's a very old university. Sometimes in the way it behaves, you can see it's very old. It takes a lot of effort to move it a little bit. We were founded, I think, in 1425, if I have that right. And I think a lot of the teaching there still happens in very much the same way as in 1425. The ugly building is a building where I work, Department of Computer Science. And we always say we work on how people interact with information, and we have 3 application domains: music, which is a lot of fun, supporting researchers, which is also a lot of fun. I won't talk about any of those today, and then technology-enhanced learning. I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, all of the slides I will show are all unoriginal slides. Okay, I've just pulled a bunch of stuff together. Stuff of my own, but also stuff of other people. I should be very clear about that. I will also talk about some work that I certainly didn't do any of this myself, and some of it wasn't even done by my team. If I forget to mention that, I apologize now. If you recognize your own work, you should take it as a compliment. I think you're doing fabulous work, and people should know about it. Okay. It also means that some of you will recognize maybe some of the slides. I do a lot of these presentations, and so some of you may have suffered from me before. What I often do these days, of course, is I ask people, give me some indication of what I can talk about. Help me out a bit here. And so I'll show you a few things, not everything, because some of it was a little bit less meant for public consumption, shall we say. I think Fred is here. He said, well, just say, that OER is good, is how I think about it. So OER is good, but you already know, so we can move on. Okay, great. Then some of you may know that I do work in technical standards, learning object metadata, simple query interface, that sort of thing. If you know SCORM, then you know some of these things. And people often confuse that, like I'm sure Steven knows the difference, but the way he asked the question was, what do I think about educational standards? And my reply was, I think nothing about educational standards. It means nothing to me. But if you think technical standards are passé, and if you think metadata is no longer relevant, then I think we disagree. If, on the other hand, you think it's time we stop talking about metadata and we should just use it, then I agree with you. Okay. But don't mistake the fact that people hide the technology, which is good, for the idea that technology would no longer be relevant. That I don't think is true. Okay. Probably at the start of what I want to say, I should also say that I think all of us can afford to experiment greatly in class. Because if we mess things up, that's okay. Because things aren't so great anyway. I know there's a few colleagues from Leuven here, so maybe I should preface that. Hey, of course, my university is doing great, and nobody should change anything. But for some of these other institutions, maybe, what is happening is not so great. This is the thing that really bugs me, and I don't understand why not everybody is very upset about it. Like many of you, I'm sure. I have kids in schools. my youngest has it's like not very important, but a bit of a medical problem. She spends only 20% of the time in school these days that she normally should spend there. And of that 20%, still, that's more than double what she needs to learn what she's learning there. Now, I won't say that she's wasting all that other time. Okay, there's also the social interactions and all that. But I really think that the job we do in schools, the job we do in the universities, is not, we don't do it very well. We have these kids, these teenagers for I have them for 5 years. I teach engineering at the university. It's a 5-year degree. What they learn in 5 years, I can make them learn in 6 months. If, a lot of the irrelevant stuff wouldn't get in the way. And so I feel very comfortable changing everything I do with my students because it's not very good. Then if I change it and it gets worse, it can't get much worse. And so contrary, for some reason, it must be some medical condition I have or something, but for some reason my colleagues are always very frightened to experiment because, no, you can't do that, it will disrupt everything. How can you, I have 600, my first year of engineering is 600 students. You can't just mess around with 600 students. And my answer is, sure you can, I've done it for the last 3 years and nobody, it wasn't in the newspaper like Leuven University students fail because... Well, we once had a very small thing in a I'm lucky, very small newspaper that said that I'm teaching pornography at the university. That was 5 years ago when one of my wikis got spammed. And so indeed, it looked a little bit like I had more interesting things to show than I really did. So I put a spam filter on it, and since then nothing happened. Okay. So anyway, I would really encourage you, experiment much more seriously because, the risks are very low. I wouldn't want the pilot in the airplane when you come here to go experiment because, then maybe, consequences could be bad. In this case, there's not that much to lose. And that bothers me so much more because I really am a learning guy, and I suspect that many of you are. Actually, I suspect that most people are. And this is my last big message, and then I'll get into some of the details. But, think about it for a minute. I think learning is so much of what makes us people and not stones. Okay? And the image that I always have when I'm in front of my students, what I'm always thinking of is, like many of you, let me ask the question, who amongst you has ever taught his children how to ride a bicycle? Have you done that as a parent? You typically do that? And of course what happens is you do this a little bit and then they go for 2-3 meters, you let go of them, and then of course they fall, right? And try to remember that. Some of you are a little bit older, but try to remember that when your children fall, at least I had it with my kids, their knees bleed. It's not a nice sight. And what is a typical reaction of the typical, I don't know, how long ago is it, 6-7-year-old, 5-6-year-old? What is a typical reaction when they fall and they bleed, when they learn how to ride a bike? The typical reaction, or maybe I have strange kids, and the typical reaction is they get back on the bike and they say, let's do more. And think about that. I literally have that image very often when I go into my lecturing room. Think about that. What if I could make my 600 students, it's a bit bigger than this room, what if I could make them bleed? And their reaction would be, we're so eager to learn, let's bleed some more. Because really I want to learn how to ride a bicycle, or really, like in my case, I teach problem solving and design. Really, I want to be a really good engineer. I want to know how you solve really important problems. Make me bleed, it's fine, but make me, I was going to use a word you can't say, make me learn, please. Okay? And so this, how would I say, tension is too not strong enough a word, this dichotomy between, I think, what many of us have deep inside of, you really want to learn, right? And then what we do in schools and universities is this sort of, it's fake learning, let's admit it. Very often, not always. And I'm sure in your institute everything is fine, but just apart from my university, remember that when you go back, please, Pete and Fred, and apart from your university, everybody else does it all wrong. And so anyway, what we've been trying to do is, let me go back to this. One thing that I've worked on quite a bit and that I'll talk about for the next 20 minutes or so is, at least it would help, I think, if all of you had every learning resource that exists available to you at all times. And if all of your students would have the same benefit, right? So that when you're walking around in a museum here and you think, rainforest, I'm not completely sure that I remember exactly how that functions, you could pull that up at that moment, to give you one example. And yes, I do know that making all the learning resources in the world available to everybody does not solve all of the problems. Yes, you also need to develop some activities around that. Yes, there's all sorts of other issues. But I think that creating abundance of resources, I think that removing friction between you and really good OERs is helpful and is a platform for innovation. The way that I sometimes think about it is, if you can no longer hide behind, oh, I'm not allowed to do that because of copyright. Oh, I'm not allowed to do that because I don't have a budget. Oh, I'm not allowed to do that because I don't have a professional content development team. Oh, I'm not allowed. If you can no longer hide behind those fake reasons why you don't do something meaningful in class, then maybe you will do something meaningful in class. That sounded a bit too serious. I'm sure that, I'll try to lighten up a little bit. It's not all bad news. Okay, and so we did that work on making everything available to everybody in a foundation that I helped to set up, the Ariadne Foundation, that since 1994 has been working on share and reuse. When we started, we said share and reuse is what we want to do in 1994. And I guess we're a little bit stubborn or a little bit obsessed or something, because when you go to the website now, it still says this foundation tries to do share and reuse of learning resources. Okay? So it's been a long time that we've worked on this. In the meantime, we've now partnered with similar institutions across the globe, and I know that some of these institutions have people here in the room, so I'm very happy to work with these people. We now have this group that we call the GLOBE group, and basically the idea of GLOBE is it's a network of networks of repositories. And when I use repositories, I use it in a very loose sense. Anything that holds learning material is relevant, okay? And if you are working in a network of such repositories, and if you're not linked to GLOBE yet, then I think you should. And, talk to me. I'd be happy to discuss how we can make that happen. There's a lot of technology behind the scenes. I'd be happy to discuss it in depth. Hey, I still do computer science and engineering, right? So I'd be happy to talk about the details of it. But I'll just take out a very small piece of the technology to show you where we are today. And this has taken about 15 years of development, working with lots of other people, some of you, and lots of other people in the world. And again, this is not just me doing this all on my own, to the contrary. What I think is kind of, maybe interesting to mention here is that we're now at a stage where if you have a repository and if you support the technical standards that are relevant in this space, I can hook you up to this network this afternoon. Okay? And I'll show you how that typically works, so that because sometimes it feels a little bit like it's all very abstract, and how do you connect things to this worldwide repository? And it's really, really it's not as simple as it should be, but it's orders of magnitude simpler and faster than it used to be. Okay. Let me just show you immediately how it works concretely. Let me get out. That's what happens when you remix some material sometimes. Let me show it to you this way. So this is what it looks overall. Okay. Just think of it as it's a network of stuff. Okay. It's like an internet of learning, if you want to think about it in that way. That's fine with me too. Okay. At the moment, what we have there is a little bit more than 1 million resources. Okay, so there's 1 million, depends a bit on your definition, but let's say there's 1 million OERs that are available there. What I think is important to know about that number is it took us 5 years, 1995, 2000, it took us 5 years to do the first 5,000. So since then, we've done about 1,000 years of additional, growth. And growth is going somewhat, well, you can argue about it. It's certainly going faster than it used to. Whether it's going exponential, I don't know, you can argue about that. I think 1 million is nothing. I really want all the learning material that exists to be available through this network. Everything. Okay? And the way, again, that we can make that happen, I'll give you one concrete example. Last week we added Nsdl, which I guess many of you know this. I don't even know what it stands for. National Science Digital, or Network Science Digital Library, some library with some learning resources. And literally, the only thing we have to do nowadays to add that is, I was talking to someone who told me, oh, I can give you the URL of where you can get the material. So you add 4 lines of text to give a little, including, 3 lines of text, 1 email address in case things go wrong, where you can get some support. It doesn't support SPI, so this is easy. It does support OAI, so you paste in 1 URL. That's it, okay? It doesn't support SQI, so we can move over this, and this is it. Then once, if I can do that with some of your resources or repositories this afternoon, that would be great. The next step that happens is, let me just show you. At the moment, we have 60 of these networks typically that we harvest from. And we have, as I said, a little bit more than 1 million objects. Okay? If I can go home and change 59, that's the harvesting part. SQI is federated search. I may talk about that a bit later. If I can go home and move that 59 number up a bit, that would be great. If I can move the 1 and a bit million up, that would be great too. I know that some of you have some content that's not available in here, and I don't understand why you wouldn't want to share it. Then the next thing that happens is someone in my team says, okay, we need to go harvest from there. I don't want to bother you with the technicalities, but basically that means we come get all of the metadata from your repository and we store them locally, because if we have everything where we resolve queries, then we don't waste time querying you when people come to us. And then the next thing is, it's there. Now, I think I can try to show you this, but the network, as you know, is very, very bad. This worked perfectly fine, obviously, in the hotel room, so you'll have to take my word for it. Okay, no, here we are, even on this network. I can do this. So this is one, there's a lot of, I'll talk a little bit about that, but there's a lot of different front ends. This is very low resolution. Let me say, we're in Barcelona, right? So Barcelona, I should learn how to spell the city. I'm normally this is the moment where I say it goes very, very fast, but try Googling here. It's about the same speed. It's literally the same speed normally. You'll have to take my word for it. This is really an internet problem, I think. How much longer should I wait? Is anyone here connected? Okay, now you know why this is not working. Ask me to show it to you when there is some connectivity, and this is very annoying. But anyway, so you basically have, it's basically like a Google of learning, right? And when you search on the left-hand side, you see different facets. In this case, I was just showing that when I searched yesterday for Barcelona as well, I got some resources from Nsdl. So once you register with us, your results show up in this search. Okay. Now, you may think, okay, so you have 1 million objects. Why would I be interested in that? Why is that important? Why is making it from 1 million to 10 million to, I think we need to have certainly billions of these objects in there. Why does that change anything? And we could have a long conversation about that. I think the basic argument is just that, like, with much other stuff, I think there is also this notion of the long tail of learning. Now, I don't know, but I think most of you probably know what we mean when we say the long tail, right? Who knows what I'm talking about when I say the long tail? Almost everybody, not everybody. My version of it is there's very few people who teach Egyptian hieroglyphs. Is that the English word for these drawings, hieroglyphs? Okay, there's very few people who teach that probably, at least in my university, I think there's probably 1 or 2. But if you pool all these people together worldwide, you get a critical mass of teachers of hieroglyphs. And there's enough of them out there to share material and reuse one another's material. And you have to do that on a global scale, literally global, worldwide scale, because there's only, I don't know, 1 or 2 people doing this in Leuven. There's maybe 5 all in total in my country. I don't know how many there are in Europe, let's say a few dozen. And it's only when you have the global scale that all these niche communities of learning have enough critical mass to play this game of I'll give you my stuff if you give me your stuff, and together we can spend less time building stuff and we'll still have more and better stuff nevertheless. That's what, for me, the long tail of learning means, okay? Right, and I think what we're beginning to achieve at the moment with Globe, it's only in niche communities, but in some niche communities, computing is one, we now have changed the context of scarcity of resources that used to be there. We have changed from, oh, I want an OER to talk about X, Y, or Z, but I don't know where to find it. We have changed that problem into a very different problem, a much better problem. Still a problem, though. The much better problem now is there is so much good stuff out there that I don't know how to choose anymore. It's the Google problem, right? That is a real problem. There's actually a nice book about this problem, The Paradox of Choice, or because we're in Spain, I'll say it in French, l'embarras du choix. If choosing becomes difficult, then you need help making appropriate choices, right? It's a very good book, by the way. And so we've also been working for the last, 5, 6, 7 years as we saw abundance coming. We've been working on trying to figure out how to deal with abundance, how to address the much better problem, but still problem of abundance. And so the way that I think about it really is it's all about speed. It's all about removing friction between me and good resources. If I have to go to a website and the internet doesn't work, because the Wi-Fi doesn't work, then I'm going to get tired of waiting and I'm not going to use the good resources that are out there. So that barrier needs to go. Now, most of the time, not always, for instance, not in some musea in Barcelona, that problem has been solved, at least for most of us. If we look at the global situation, maybe that's a bit different, and that needs work as well. Okay, so here are a few examples of the sort of things we do to remove friction between you and the content. This is the outcome, if you want, a portal solution that we've developed in a number of projects with, not all, but I think 14 ministries of education in Europe. The LRE, the Learning Resource Exchange, we work together with the European SchoolNet on this series of projects. And it's basically a portal as you know it. You can rate stuff, you can put stuff in your little folders, you can share stuff, you can tell your friends about stuff, and you can follow what stuff other people are using. Nothing spectacularly interesting, nothing technically revolutionary about it. It's like, I don't know if that means something to you, like a delicious but a little bit more focused on learning, and with a community of teachers. This is typically a community of high school teachers, and this is now talking about sustainability and impact. There is now a board with representatives of these 14 ministries of education that guarantee the sustainable, well, guarantee is too strong a word, that try to make this a sustainable operation, and that do all the interlinking with school infrastructure, all these things that I don't know anything about that are really complicated about the politics in a country to make this go to a school. So this is live, this is up. If I had internet, I could just click, that's what I normally do, on the link at the bottom and you could use it, okay? That's one kind of interface. This is something we've developed, as I said, for teachers in high schools, okay? Here's a very, and oh yes, by the way, I think it will show you now. So there's about 100, by now it's about 150,000 objects that are available there. That's filtered out of the 1 million and a bit because those were the resources that people felt were appropriate for high school teachers in Europe. Here's a very different interface. Same backend, just the interface is different. This is something we did with, I think, about 12 schools of architecture. Now we're talking university level, schools of architecture in Europe, but I think there's one or two in Northern America. And architects feel that the visual aspect is very important when they filter on what is available to use with their students. They need to see the buildings, so we made them see the buildings. The important thing to know is 92% of the technology is the same as the technology for the high school teachers. It's just the front end that's different, and what is also different is the stuff that gets filtered out that is relevant to architecture students at university level. I actually did this yesterday in the hotel. There's a lot of nice buildings in Barcelona that you can find some good information about. You can also navigate through physical space, or you can just pull up a map and then it will show you, oh, you're here, and over here we have buildings that we know things about. And of course the next step would be, and I know that you're a student and that this building would fit very well with what you're learning at the moment, so you should really get out of this door, take a left, second on the right, and that's where the building is. That's where we're moving. Okay, so that's just building portals, building, some web address that people can go to get material that is relevant for them. Now, what we've also done quite a bit of work on is try to not make people go to some place to get learning resources, but we've also worked quite a bit on trying to get into their workflow, right? So we will bring, so to speak, the resources to you. You don't have to go to some website or something. And so integration, I think, is a really important means to get rid of some of the friction. And so one of the things we've done, for instance, is we've integrated access to the Globe network in Moodle. And I'm sure that all of you know what Moodle is. Do you know? Just a quick, okay, so you all know. So this is just a normal Moodle thing, but I think, right, it will draw something now. So we've just added this little extra option. So everything else is just standard Moodle, right? But whenever you want to insert some content, there's a little extra option that says, hey, maybe you want to get it out of this Globe thing, okay? And when you do that, as you typically must, and I think that's wrong, but that's the way Moodle works, as you typically have to do, you need to enter a few data, but then you can choose from Globe, and you get search results in your Moodle environment. You don't go out of your course. And I'm not a great fan, by the way, of Moodle, nor of Blackboard or any of these other things. But if that is what you're using, then that is where we should be, okay? Because at that moment when you want to add content for your students, Globe should be an option, rather than just select from your hard disk or whatever it is you normally do, okay? And so then you can just integrate one of those resources that comes out of Globe. Also, the inverse you can do. If you have some content that you want to make available in your course, you can do that in Moodle. And when you do that in Moodle, you can also say, oh, by the way, not only make it go in my course, please also make it available in the Globe network. I don't want to do that afterwards. It's a little bit the way I think SlideShare should work. I'm using Keynote here or PowerPoint. It's the same thing. At the moment when I say save, I should be able to say save and put into SlideShare, please. Why would I have to do that separately? Okay. So here for Globe, you can do that. When you do that in Moodle, you get this extra thing that allows you to select the license you want to attach to it. And not only goes the content into your course, it also goes into, after a few clicks, and after you upload it, it not only goes into your course, but it also goes into Globe. Actually, when we do that, we also add some of the metadata automatically because we can get them out of your the context of your course. Okay. Now, just to put that in perspective, so we have this plugin for Moodle that's available for you, and you can add that to your Moodle installation. What I would really want the Moodle people to do, and we've had some conversation and limited success in that, is I would really want them to make something like this. It doesn't need to be our software. We can give it, but if they use other software, that's fine too. But I would really want to encourage Moodle and other people who work on systems like this to make that part of the standard distribution. Why would you have to do something extra to make your course content available to the rest of the world? I think you should do something extra to make it not available to the rest of the world. Okay? If that would happen, and again, we have at least had some conversation. The data I have, they may be not completely up to date, but I once spoke immediately after Martin Dugiamas, and he gave these numbers. Let's say there's 2 million courses in Moodle. If all of these Moodle installations had that software component that I just mentioned, we would, just like that, have 2 million extra courses in that globe network. That's the sort of effect that I'm trying to go after. Something that, I think it's great when an individual teacher uploads one individual piece of content into Globe. That's great, but we also need to figure out ways and replace Globe with just the OER community. I don't care. But we need to also find ways to make this work at scale, not just by, I'll go to your website and I'll upload something and then it's available to everybody else. This needs to be the default, not the exception. Okay. Now, by the way, we've done a similar thing. We also have plugins for Word and PowerPoint. We also have a plugin for Wikimedia if you do a lot of, wiki-based development. We also have a plugin for Wikimedia. The community we work with has this thing called WikiPress, I think it's called. It's like, something that allows you to do slides on a wiki. And again, it's the same idea. When you're done altering in the wiki environment, when you say save, it saves locally and it pushes into the network automatically. Okay. So integration, I think, is another really important thing. Apart from building somewhat old-fashioned web portals, like the one for the high school teachers and the architects, and we have a few other ones as well. And another good thing to do is to integrate in the user's workflow, so they don't have to go to an OER site, but it's part of their normal working environment. Another thing we do a lot of is trying to give people visual means to navigate the abundance of learning resources. Let me show you a few examples of that. Okie dokie. Here's probably the one we've had most success with so far. This is another interface we've done on top of the architecture material. We're very proud about this one. This one was at the Architecture Biennale in Venice 2 years ago, I think. And basically, in this case, I think a little bit of this as this is the learning environment of, let's say, 2015 for architects. What you're seeing on the table, it's a big display, is the same data that come out on this portal that I showed earlier. It's the same data that come out of that network of Globe information. But in this case, the way you interact with it is you put cards on the table. We call it a reactable. Yes, we're not very good with these ways we go. And basically, the cards represent architects, buildings, architectural styles, architectural techniques, and I think there's one other thing. It doesn't matter too much. Now, you can understand, this gives you a very different way to work with these resources. By putting cards on the table, you indicate what you're interested in, and then the software draws the connections, suggests additional material you may be interested in, and allows you to navigate this space. Actually, it was kind of nicely done in this case, and the video may be a little bit dark for you, but it was actually in a somewhat darker room, and it also had 3 big displays on the walls. So you have this. Now imagine that you are a professor of architecture, and you have like 12 students, and you're standing around this table, and you also have the 3 big displays on the wall. Can you imagine that gives you quite a flexible environment to do some serious work, a little bit different from let's go to a website and download the document, but it's the same information that's powering all of this. That's what I mean when I say abundance can be a platform for innovation. That's what I mean when I say we can remove friction between you and the resources. I'm sure that if we make all of these OERs available in transparent ways to people, people will think of new ways to make use of them, and this is one example. This is another example that I was going to show you from YouTube, a much more recent example where we try to support people in their research. The same thing, big display, the way it looks is very, very different, the data is very different, the users are very different, but the same idea, we represent it in a visual way so that you can have more flexible ways to navigate the information space. Final thing I wanted to mention is besides doing websites, besides integrating into your workflow, and besides trying to give you a more powerful visual means to navigate OERs, another thing we've been doing is to try and figure out what people pay attention to. Because if I figure out what my students pay attention to, if I know what my colleagues who teach similar topics pay attention to, then I can use that to figure out what to do next. That sounds very abstract. What does that really mean? Let's see what I can tell you about that. Actually, I'll use the opportunity to plug some work we're doing in a group called Stellar, but it's really an initiative called DataTel. Basically, we now have, I think, 5 or 6 data sets where we've captured what students do in a course. And then you can build systems that use those data, and we can compare what you do with what we do because we're using the same data. That sounds very abstract. I think I have an example here, maybe. So one example is a data set that the Mendeley people have provided us. I think the next slide. This gives you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data sets we have at the moment that you can use to mine, to support people who learn with these resources. And then if you build a system and I build a system that uses these data and we use the same data, then we can make meaningful comparisons and we can be a little bit more scientific about what we're doing. Of course, one of the models behind this is what, for instance, I think in the US, Netflix has done with their data set that is about recommending, I think in that case, is it video? I think it is video, right? Material to their customers, right? Now, in this case, what we want to do is we want to recommend learning resources to students or to teachers. And we want to compare your recommendations with other people's recommendations and figure out what works best. And so there's a challenge out there. I think we'll get together, I may have this wrong, but March or April with people working on this topic to compare results. I think the bigger point is, as far as I know, in this context, it's one of the first initiatives to try to do more data-driven research, to build on specific, how would I say, to make sure that results are comparable, let me put it that way. Also, I think some of you here in this room are involved in running a conference that will look at this sort of thing in more detail. If we capture, and of course Moodle already does that, and Blackboard already does that, if we capture all the interactions that students have with material, we can start to learn from what they do, figure out that some things don't work and some things do work. And of course, we should do that in a somewhat visual way. Coming back to the point I made earlier. This is one early prototype, although it's a little bit more than an early prototype. It's actually been used in, I think, 7 or 8 larger courses with typically, I think, a few hundred students, well, maybe more, a few dozen students. And this is giving a teacher, typically, a dashboard of what is going on in class. Now, again, I could just go to that URL if I had an internet connection. For now, you'll have to believe me. There's quite a few panels, as you can see, with these things here on the top. In this case, what you see is activity of different students. Every line is a student. Here is a student who started very early and did a lot of work and also ended very early. But I think is probably the one who did most work in this course, just measuring time. Now, there's different panels. You can also zoom in on a particular piece of the timeline here. You can figure out that, here was a moment when a lot of people started. Here was another moment when a lot of students were activated. There's quite a few of them who still haven't really done all that much, even though I think, I'm not sure what the timeline is in this case. I think the next slide, this gives you, it doesn't work very well if I have to show it in static pictures, so I encourage you to follow the link a little bit later and play with it yourself. Even the data about these courses is available online, so you can play for yourself. Here at the bottom, you see different representations of what students do in the course, like how many documents do they look at, which documents do they look at, how much time do they spend there, do they hand in their assignments, that sort of stuff. This is what we try to do with the attention people pay in class. Maybe I should have something like that to measure the attention you're paying to what I'm saying now, and maybe that would help me figure out which parts worked or didn't work very well with the presentation. But that's literally where we're heading. At the moment, it captures interaction, and yes, I deposited a research proposal where I want to wire students with sensors. Serious. I would like to have all of you wired with sensors so I could, after my talk, analyze a little bit, I had them here, and then they all went, then the internet came alive and they all went to go do something else. You want to say something, Griff? Yep.
I'd like to wire you with a sensor.
Yes, please.
Because I think that typically when you get into these things, people think these are tools for the teachers. And the reality is they should be tools for the learners.
Well, actually, that was the point I was going to get to. But you're absolutely right. So that's the other use case for this. I am a student, let's say, in this course. It's not true. This is about something about agriculture, I think. But let's say I'm a student here. I can compare myself with what the other students are doing, which is nice. The other thing that we do then, that's where I was going to, is then we can use my attention, compare it to that of the other students in class, and use what the other students have done to recommend stuff to me. It's literally... Well, technically it's a little bit different, but it's basically the same idea as other people who bought this book also bought on Amazon. It's the basic idea is other students who learn like you and who had the same problem doing this assignment that you are now having learned a lot from using these resources. So it's a little bit more complicated, and yes, it needs larger numbers, so it's a bit difficult to do it with a class of 4. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is a class of 200 or something, and then it starts to work. And so, yes, Griff, this is, apart from the wiring me, giving the tools to the students is absolutely, a good idea. I was going to show another example. This is one that I promised I would show. Again, I was going to go to this website. Is Hans here from EduFeeder? I think Hans gave a talk yesterday. EduFeeder has similar, a bit different, but it's the same basic idea. You give both the teachers and the students an overview of what is going on in the course, and that you can do if you know what they're paying attention to. And by the way, you should think of paying attention to in a rather generic way. Paying attention to means you interact with a resource. And by the way, at least in the way we do it, a resource can also be another student, can be the teacher, can be a piece of content, can be an activity, can be all sorts of things. Okay, let me try to wrap up because I think we're getting closer to the end. I also have a number of other things I could talk to you about, my experiences in class. Maybe the one experience I'll give you is one of the things I do, and I'm sure that many of you do as well. When you do your class in the open, I know that quite a few people are experimenting with that now. I do my classes in the open as well. My class basically takes place on blogs because I'm old and that's the technology I'm comfortable with. But blogs also because it makes my students share everything they do with the rest of the world. And yes, we also push that in Globe. And so just as an example to show you what I think is the power there. For me, this is not about removing copyright restrictions. For me, this is about something way more deeper. For me, this is open learning. For me, is about doing learning in a way that is not detached from the rest of your life and from the rest of the life of other people. So, for instance, to give you one example, one of the assignments my students had to do is they had to evaluate from a usability point of view a piece of software. In this case, it was Mendeley, but it doesn't really matter what it was. Okay, and they have to post their review of that piece of software. It's early on in a class I teach on human-computer interaction. They have to post it on their blogs. Okay, great, interesting, not so terribly sophisticated or anything. But the real difference is, because that blog is open, it gets tracked by lots of different pieces of software. In this case, what happened is that the CEO of the company, Mendeley, reacted on my students' blogs and said, you've identified 3 problems. I actually think that that first problem is not a bug, it's a feature. You misunderstood what our software is trying to do. The second thing is something we're working on. You're right, that's a good point. And the third thing, we'd never considered. You've identified something we didn't even know, but I think you may be onto something. So we'd like to follow this up with you. Now, imagine what this does to a 20-year, 21-year-old student, okay? Suddenly, what you do in class is part of real life. You know, you can evaluate some piece of software, that's what my students do, but it can be some other activity, and real people, not the teacher, but not me, but real people may come back to you and say, that's kind of interesting, we'll follow up on that, maybe, you know, I'd like to have some more details. How many users did you involve in this study? Suddenly, this becomes authentic learning, real learning, not fake learning, the sort of learning we do all too often, I think, in the university and school. And so I would very much encourage you to do that sort of open learning. But I also probably should warn you that if you start doing that, sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't. Remember what I said earlier, that's fine because, you know, if it doesn't work, it's not working very well at the moment either. So it doesn't matter if it doesn't work. You can take some risk, okay? And if it works, it's, of course, the greatest feeling you can have. But just to show you that trying things out may sometimes lead to an unexpected result and not exactly what you wanted to do, and that's because designing these experiences is hard. And that's why you need to evaluate them and try out different things and see what works and what doesn't work. I'll show you this video that some of you, I'm sure, have seen before. That's just to illustrate the idea that design can be hard. Does anyone know? I think you all know what they're holding in their hands, right? Someone wants to shout? What is it that these kids have in their hand? The OLPC, the $100 laptop. And now here you have 2 not only bright, well, they're terribly bright kids. They're my kids. And they're, you know, like their mother, they're terribly bright. This video lasts 10 minutes. Because at the time, YouTube had a 10-minute upload limit. And at the end of the 10 minutes, they've taken out the battery, and they've done a lot of other stuff, but they haven't opened the machine. And so this is what happens when I experiment in class all the time. I think I have a great idea, I give my students something, and then I look at them and I think, I'm not sure, maybe we should make this open in a different way. By the way, there's many more machines in my house than people, so it's not like these kids have never seen a computer, they don't know what they're doing. There's also, I should probably mention, there's also another video of me when I first had an OLPC. It also lasts 10 minutes, and I also haven't opened it. So be prepared once you start experimenting with this. Be prepared to fail. Failing is fine. Again, if anything sticks with you from what I tried to explain, you can afford to try things out. I think the OLPC is great, but you need to experiment and figure out what makes sense for the children in this case, how they can at least open the machine, because otherwise everything you wanted to do doesn't really make a lot of sense anymore. When you design experiences around these open educational resources, you will have the same experience. At the very least, you can no longer hide then behind the excuse of, well, I don't have machines. We have machines. I don't have resources. We have resources. We have 1 million, a bit more than that. We want to get many more. So talk to me a bit later today if you want to add your resources to Globe. Think about integrating resources into people's workflow. Think about giving them visual ways to interact with the resources. Let's use abundance of resources to remove friction and to innovate. Thanks. I'll stop here. Am I allowed to take questions, David? Or there's one there.
Hi. Something towards the end of your talk struck me because I use blogs in my courses, but I actually close them off and password protect them because the students I have found want to have a safe place to express themselves, and I really honor that. And so how do you... I agree. I see how there are interesting things happen when you open up to the world. I mean, one student actually got spammed by one of these Nigerians and went down the wormhole. So I had to get him out of that. I think that there needs to also be a discussion that privacy is something that is important and valuable as well.
I agree. And so, of course, we can have a very long conversation. But to give you the essence, so some people think we need to provide a walled garden to students, right? A safe place, I think you just mentioned. This is actually part of my university as well. So we have lots of, literally, walled gardens. And I've given it a fair amount of thought because there is a real danger there. There's a real risk. What if I say something terribly stupid when I'm a student and then 7 years later it comes back to haunt me? I get very famous and then they play it on television and then my career is gone. I will never be the president of my country, which in my case is okay because we have a king. We don't have a president. So. So is there not a real risk? I think, yes, there is a real risk. But there's two things that I think, there's two reasons why I still do it in the open. And I have conversations with my students about it, and the one thing I allow them to do, because some of them are really frightened about it, what I allow them to do is to take on a different personality, and then they can call themselves whatever, and they only need to tell me what their real identity is. So I have emails I have emails that say, in reality, I'm Erik Duval, but in your course, my name will be whatever, Barack Obama. Okay, and then everything that happens, the blog has, so there's no clear, immediate trace back to the person. That's a little bit of privacy that I give them. But in the end, I think two things. First of all is, when they get out of the classroom, and also I'm in a university environment, so they're all already adult people, when they get out of there, they will live in the open too. And I think it's not a good strategy to keep them in this walled garden and then just make them develop strategies to deal with openness afterwards. Because then they're not very well equipped to do that. And then they will mess up after they leave the university. It's also, by the way, the reason why I tell my students, if you want to read your email in class, if you want to play poker in class, go ahead. Do it now. Now develop a strategy to divide your attention between me and what you have on your lap, so that later on, when it will hurt you if you make a mistake, you will have appropriate strategies to do it. Now is the time to learn. The other reason why I think, I won't talk about this, but the other reason why I think really I want to do it in the open, this learning stuff, is because I think the learning part is so, there should not be a disconnect between your life and what you do to learn. I think making that disconnect is one of the reasons why we have so much fake learning, why we have disinterested students or, by the way, disinterested teachers as well very often. It's because we're just going through the motions. We're not doing the real thing. So that's only part of the answer. I know we can have a very long dinner discussion about this. I look forward to a dinner discussion about it. Simon.
Hi, Erik. Thanks very much. That was great, as usual. Learning analytics. So we have ways of picking up that a student touched a particular resource, visited a URL, maybe interacted with somebody. have you got any clues about analytics that can pick up the quality of interaction? Right. So the fact that I interacted with you or visited a page tells me something, but learning analytics are going to have to get better at actually the quality of the interaction, because we're interested in what actually happened when they interacted with that person or resource.
Yeah, well, I must admit I'm struggling with that one. So one thing I struggle with is I'm not completely sure how important it is that we know lots about the quality of the interaction. One of the versions of the talk that I sometimes do when I talk more about the music things we do is I explain that we can now do really sophisticated stuff with the music. Our goal now is to make you cry. With the music we select automatically. It's real music, but we don't do computer-generated music, but we select pieces of music, we measure your responses, and we can, at least that's where we're heading, I think, make you cry. Now, think about that. We can do that. We don't really know a lot about the quality of the interaction apart from things that happen to your body. We don't really understand what goes on when people listen to music. In the same way, I think, I don't really understand what happens when people learn, but I know how to influence it. I know how to, when I work with my students in real life, I can detect clues that help me to make decisions so they learn better, but I still don't really understand what is going on in that process. Similar online, I think you can do a lot of useful support for the student, and let's say learner, because it doesn't have to be obviously in a formal education setting, you can do a lot of useful things even if you don't really understand the process of learning. So the answer is, I don't know how much we need to know about the quality of the interaction in order to still be able to support you in your learning. Because that's the only goal. Well, that's not the only goal. That's the goal we focus on. It would also be great if we better understood what is happening in your head, but that's a different question, I think. Is that a reasonable answer for now?
It's a good discussion to have.
Okay.
Okay, Scott, last one.
Professor Duval, thank you for your talk today. I was going to ask you a long question, but then I realized that was mostly so that I would not look stupid myself. So instead, I'll save you the long preamble and simply just ask a stupid question. Can you please reconcile for me, both philosophically but also personally, your desire to make students bleed, in your words, and your desire to remove friction? Because these, for me, do not sit easily together, and in my experience, there is a requirement of friction to bleed.
Yeah, but some friction is good and some friction is bad, okay? So, for instance...
who decides?
Well, who decides? It depends. It depends on the situation. For instance, in this case, there is a lot of friction between me and some of the things I wanted to show you because there is no connectivity. Let's assume that we all agree, just for argument's sake, let's all agree for a moment that is bad friction, okay? I think there's a lot of that sort of friction. Literally, it's only a few years ago that I had that sort of friction also when I was teaching to my students because connectivity was so-so, okay? So that's bad friction. Do we agree about that? And that makes me bleed. Okay, at least it's clear. Let me ask the question, is that argument clear? So then I bleed, like I was bleeding in front of you. I wasn't getting to what I really wanted to show you, and it's not useful. Not all bleeding is useful, right? When I taught my children how to ride a bicycle, I didn't just smack them on the head to make them bleed, because then you will learn how to ride a bicycle faster. That doesn't work, okay? So some friction may be good, although I actually think that very often, the bigger point is I think we very often, the way I at least want to use the word friction, is that I think we very often hide behind excuses that we cannot do certain things because they're, let's say, technically impossible. Well, they're not, or at least for the privileged that live in a world of plenty like we do, they're not anymore. There's a lot of this, oh yes, I would be a great teacher if I had 1,700 visualizations of how a volcano works. Of course I could give a great class on that. Well, the answer is you have these resources now, so what are you waiting for? That's the point I was trying to make. Then we can follow up later if you want. David, can I take another question, or people want to go for coffee, I think?
All right. One more.
So it's his fault that you're not going to get coffee yet. But still, I'm interested in your question.
Well, thank you for fantastic talk, very inspirational on a number of levels for me. I have a question, just let's say you mentioned the example with hieroglyphs, and if you have, let's say, just a few dozen experts on the planet, and of course you're building a fantastic system, and if you don't capture, let's say, half of them because they never heard of your project, or it's to be assumed that a lot of people will have difficulties finding and learning and so on, and some will simply refuse. Would you what would be your take on, let's say, Google comes out with something that will do a very similar, let's say a student does a Google Summer of Code and creates a similar interface that can capture these kind of things along with these other things that might not be properly indexed and categorized with metadata. Like, what would be your take on something like that? Or in simpler words, do you think that this framework is the point where we should head to, or we should look into something like even larger scale solution, like being integrated in Google, or as a de facto?
Yeah, so the very short answer, I'll try to keep it short, but still want to elaborate a little bit. The very short answer would be, please, please let Google do learning.google.com, please. The only additional thought would be, and then let's please maybe also have a learning.bing.com and a learning.yahoo.com and a learning.unesco.org maybe, so let's have plenty of those. I have a little bit, I'm a bit uncomfortable if our only window into this world would be Google. But apart from that, please somebody put me out of business for this sort of thing so I can go do something else. Yes, please. Absolutely.
Thanks.